Welcome again to the 2021 Fall Wine Club preview. Really excited to share this lineup of wines. We have 7 plus a little bonus wine as well. So I am Kasey Martin, the Wine Club and Member Services Director here at J. Lohr, and I am joined by our COO and President, Jeff Meier, for today's tasting. So we are going to be tasting our lineup of wines, a combination. We have actually 4 different wine clubs. So a combination of these wines will be a part of all 4 of those shipments. Some, all 4 shipments will receive some, for instance, our 2 white wines. If you're a red wine only drinker, you're not receiving those, so don't worry. So we will get started, but I think maybe the most important thing to start with, Jeff, is quick 60-second update on what's happening right now because it's harvest.
Yeah, absolutely. Harvest is definitely happening, but in both the Arroyo Seco and in Paso, it is a late year, so we're 2 weeks behind probably an average year this year. In Paso, we've harvested just Petit primarily up to this point in time, a little bit of Merlot, a little bit of Syrah, and a tiny bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. We haven't even harvested 10% of the vintage at this point in time. And in the Arroyo Seco, we've harvested a big fat 0 so far in terms of the whites there. We're hoping by the first part of next week, we'll be getting into Sauvignon Blanc, and then probably not until the first week of October will we be looking at Chardonnay. And interestingly, the vineyard I've been spending the most time in has been Carol's vineyard up in St. Helena, because I went out there in late August and I tasted the cab and I'm like, this cab tastes pretty ripe. And so I brought a sample back to the lab, and sure enough, it was like almost 24 bricks. And so actually from Carol's, we've picked maybe about 50% of the vintage already up there from our block 1, both our strong and weak vines. And the good news so far, and keep your fingers crossed, is like the reds are off the charts thus far. All the wines we've made, super dark, really flavorful. Thank goodness, no drama this year. So it's exciting. And hopefully we'll have another great year in 2021. So.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. Really excited talking about off the chart for this year for the reds. When we get into tasting our reds here, we have a lot of 2019 vintages, so brand new releases. And according to our red winemaker, Brendan Woods, this is the vintage of his career. So hopefully you'll illuminate a little on that. We'll find out if it's the vintage of your career, Jeff, and we'll see what you have to say about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, are we ready to start with our 2020 F&G Vineyard Pinot Blanc? And as a reminder, everyone's currently muted, but if anyone has questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat. And then also, depending on the look of your Zoom, there is options under the reactions sort of feature that you can raise your hand if you have a question, and we are more than happy to unmute you and you can ask the question as well. So we're a family here, so feel free to chime in or enter questions in the chat and take advantage of having Jeff Meier here to ask your questions. So with that, we will begin with our 2020 F&G Pinot Blanc.
Grenache Blanc.
Sorry.
Kasey. Yeah.
I was so excited for the Pinot Blanc. I forgot we're starting with the Grenache Blanc. So the 2020 Gesture Grenache Blanc. So we'll start with that.
You got it.
So
Yeah.
why actually, maybe, Jeff, why would you suggest starting like 15 seconds with a Grenache Blanc instead of the Pinot Blanc?
I think it's just a little bit, a little leaner in sort of its mouthfeel, and maybe a little more crisp on the palate, whereas the Pinot Blanc has spent a little bit more time on the lees. So it's a little richer and creamier. And I just think in the order, it makes sense to kind of do them in that way. I love both of these wines, don't get me wrong, but they're just, you know, slightly different in what they bring to the table. So, you know, so when we planted the Jean Ranch, which is where the Grenache Blanc is from, out in Western Paso, it's actually the westernmost vineyard in the Appalachian out there. It was kind of an empty palette out there. And so we wanted to do both some Rhone red varietals as well as Rhone whites. And of those, we really were focused on Roussanne and Viognier, but we thought Grenache Blanc would be a nice component, particularly for like a blend with Roussanne. And that's really what we planted it for. And what's been neat is, or cool, is that we really like just the Grenache Blanc on its own. And after we kind of learned that it's a fairly tannic varietal, and we have to do more of a oxidative juice treatment handling Grenache Blanc, meaning that we're not that concerned about air at the juice phase, and let some of those tannins bind with the air, settle it, rack it, and ferment it. We get these beautiful pale wines with the Grenache Blanc, and we like them so much we decided a few years ago to make it as a standalone varietal. And it has some really nice aromatics for me. And I love your descriptors, Kasey. So I'll give mine, and then you give yours, and then you can correct me. So I kind of, for me, it's like some like citrus peel or zest that I kind of first get, whether it's grapefruit, maybe some lime. I get like beeswax. I also get some floral characters, more like jasmine, and then some apple and maybe melon. And then there's also like a minerality, like wet stones, or I know you kind of use that oyster shell term from time to time, but definitely from the aroma standpoint, it's kind of really fresh and vibrant, and you know, very, very attractive.
So I definitely picked up on the jasmine. I have notes in front of me I tasted these wines last night. And I'll get into when the Pinot Blanc, both of them had those like apple characteristics to me. The Pinot Blanc having more sort of that like Fuji, and this one really having that like Granny Smith tartar apple. I think it's easier to sort of pick up tasty notes for the season you're in too, because those are the things that are surrounding you. And so, you know, apples are what's coming here now into season. I definitely got a little sort of like honeysuckle. I loved the finish on it. I just thought the finish on this Grenache Blanc was really beautiful. And yeah, those were sort of my tasting and aromas. But I really enjoy this wine, and I think it makes sense to start with it. And it also is a great starter for like food pairings or things like that. I love the lower alcohol on it. 13.7, I think, is the alcohol in it, which, you know, makes it not for me during the week, but a perfect lunch wine. And so I really like that about it.
Yeah, and you know, it's definitely one of those wines that's really nice, just, you know, as an aperitif or sipping wine. You know, and I, you know, I think of like, we did this tasting with Janet Fletcher from Planet Cheese with UC Davis, with this executive leadership board, and they had this one cheese called Crucolo, which was from like northern Italy, and it's made from cow's milk, and they mostly graze on grass. And this would be just like really a nice thing to sit there with some, French baguette and some of that cheese, and this wine would be really nice. Or as we kind of come into these cooler months, I'm almost thinking just like doing a cheese fondue with Emmentaler and Swiss and a little bit of dried mustard and a little bit of Kirsch in there, and dipping breadcrumbs and some veggies in there and so on. But really nice, very easy, enjoyable wine just to kind of sip and chat with your friends.
Yeah, so if anyone has attended these tastings before, Jeff and I try to send out at least a couple recipes after. And so a question that I've had before is vegetarian recipes. So I made, and Jeff is usually, Jeff is the cook of the two of us. I'm more of the eater, but I made sure to try to get 2 recipes that are both vegetarian. They're both pasta, because how can you go wrong with pasta? And so for this one, I actually tried it with the viral TikTok feta pasta recipe, which is so simple. It's a block of feta cheese, cherry tomatoes, olive oil. You roast it in the oven. The tomatoes blister. You cook up pasta, add in the pasta and a little pasta water to the dish. And it's that simple, and it's really delicious. I think like the nice acidity in the tomatoes go really well with the acidity in the Grenache Blanc as well. So I will, you can find that recipe all over online, but I will make sure to include the variation that I did for everyone, but super easy and a great pairing for this wine. So.
Sounds good.
Are you interested to try it now, Jeff?
I am, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
The cool thing about that recipe is you could replace the feta with like another cheese that you like as well. A Parmesan would make it go a little bit better with, Cab or something. So that's why I really like the recipe. It's simple. It's easy for me to master. So. Did we get I believe I saw something pop up in the chat. Oh, people are going to make my dish, and everyone loves the idea of cheese fondue, because who wouldn't?
Yeah, for those who are even lactose intolerant, it's resist, right? It's great.
Every lactose intolerant person I've ever met still eats cheese. So, all right. So now we'll move on to our 2020 F&G Pinot Blanc, which, Jeff, I know this wine is aged in, correct me if I'm wrong, but aged in acacia.
But this is actually a concrete egg.
Oh, okay.
So it's.
So tell us about the concrete egg, though.
Sure. Well, yeah. So Jerry loves this stuff, because it's like it's something else for us to look at and purchase. But for whites, you're looking at particularly like for wines like the Grenache Blanc or the Pinot Blanc, you're looking for ways to add texture into the mouthfeel, because we're not trying to layer in any sort of oak profile in these wines at all. We're going very much fermenting in a way that we're really accentuating the fruit. And we got the eggs probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and we did a Chardonnay in there, and we did the Pinot Blanc, and we just loved it. And the thing that's interesting is like we think of like lees stirring barrels to kind of get the dead yeast cells up, and over time they release these really creamy mouthfeel compounds called manoproteins. But with the egg, you get this natural fermentation dynamic, and because it's not a flat bottom, it tends to keep all that stuff in suspension, all the yeast lees and so on. So it gets some really nice texture, and then you do get a little bit of minerality just from being in the concrete. It's a good insulator, so it keeps the fermentation temperatures fairly cool and fairly consistent. And we just really like what it does for some of the whites. I wish we had more of them, but we only have two. So one of the choices that we do is for Pinot Blanc. But and the thing, like, this varietal was one of the original 11 that Jerry planted in the Arroyo Seco back in 1972. It was just succumbing to old age. We had to, we replanted it to Chardonnay and Riesling, actually, in the early 2000s, as it was like 30 years old at that time. So, and then we've been sort of reminiscing about how nice this grape and wine was that we made. It was kind of a wine center and tasting room favorite whites among people that had experienced it before. So when our neighbor Michael Grieva in Greenfield had this really neat parcel of land that he wanted, he talked to us about planting. I asked him if he would be, willing to plant Pinot Blanc for us, and he was agreeable to that. And definitely from our standpoint, it's been kind of a nice, kind of going back to something that we really loved in the past. In Pinot Blanc, I mean, it's a very small niche of white wine lovers for Pinot Blanc, but, kind of being kind of more in the Alsatian style of winemaking, I guess you would say. We just really, kind of love some of the fruit signatures there. Like you were saying, it's kind of a riper type of apple sort of fruit. And to me, it's almost a little bit, almost to the point of overripe, even though it's not. It's just really has this, beautiful, Fuji apple, really ripe, golden delicious type thing. There's honey, there's some like graham, brown spice sort of character on the aromas. Just really pretty wine. And again, it's showcasing the Pinot Blanc grape variety. There's no, there's a very neutral vessel that it's fermented in. That's really a lot more about the texture than it is about imparting any sort of character to it. What do you find in this wine, Kasey, as far as aromas and flavors?
A lot that you mentioned. I definitely get some sort of like ocean, sea breeze, that I think it's that like minerality. It makes a lot of sense that you mentioned the texture part, or getting that texture, because I really loved like the palate, sort of that middle. It felt fuller to me, not not heavy, just like a weighted blanket, I guess, like just this perfect, like cocoon. I got some, again, fall. So I definitely got some pear and a little bit of cinnamon to it. And I mean, one of my favorite things is, again, going back to that ocean sort of sea breeze. I really love sort of minerality in wine, and I really got a lot of that. So, I'm a converter in that niche Pinot Blanc category.
Cool. No. Yeah. And I was thinking a little bit about, what I like, what I think this wine would go really well with. And I like to make mussels because they're pretty easy. I have one recipe where it's just on the barbecue. In this case, it would be something equally as simple, but it's just, you get 2 or 3 pounds of mussels, clean them. You get like a Le Creuset or Le Creuset knockoff pot, right? Because they're so expensive. But so fairly deep, and then just take the mussels, you throw them in the pan, you throw in some chopped shallots, a little bit of garlic, and then like a cup of the Pinot Blanc, and you put it over high heat, put the lid on, and then you just kind of shake it periodically and check every once in a while until all the mussels are open. And then you ladle the mussels out, put them in a place where they can stay warm, and then add a little bit of some butter, a little bit of creme fraiche, and some parsley. Just kind of cook the wine and the shallots and stuff down first, about half, and then add that butter, the creme fraiche, and the chopped parsley, and then just a little black pepper for seasoning, and then just ladle that into the bowl of mussels. And it's like a less than 20-minute kind of dish, and it's really kind of special. And you get a really nice crusty French bread that you grill or broil and put on some salted, slather it with some salted olive oil or butter, and it goes really nicely with the Pinot Blanc, and really delicious and very easy if you like those shellfish, I guess. So
right before you mentioned the crusty like baguette, I was like, oh, he better mention, because mussels I enjoy, but really they're more of an excuse for me to just like take bread and dip in that delicious sauce and soak it all up.
It's very, yeah.
I chose a Brussels sprout and like a shaved Brussels sprout and apple walnut salad for this one. So that's going to be a great option for if you aren't a seafood lover. I thought that would pair really nicely. Again, those walnuts going into it's so wonderful living here on the Central Coast. Because it is, even though it doesn't seem very seasonal, we still get all of these seasonal fruits, vegetables, and nuts. So for us, walnut season, I know that in about a month, walnut season will hit because my allergies will start acting up. I'm not allergic to walnuts, but in the air, all that pollen. So it's, I thought that would pair really nicely with this Pinot Blanc.
That sounds really good as well. Yeah.
So next we'll move on to, I also saw that somebody, John mentioned or was able to answer the question about the cheese. So thank you, John, for that Jeff had mentioned for the Grenache Blanc. So next up, we are moving into our brand new release of our 2019 Hilltop. Again, I mentioned earlier that Brendan Woods, our red winemaker, claims that the 2019 is the vintage of his career. So Jeff, maybe as we go through, we're going to taste a lot more 2019 wines. So if you would, kind of give us a little peek about how the 2019 harvest was and what could make it the vintage of his career. And then we'll talk about the Hilltop.
Yeah, so we actually have potentially four wines tonight, I guess, that are 2019, or maybe five potentially. We get to the fifth. Anyway, but for me, I've been doing this now for 37 years, so I have three great vintages in my career. So the 19 is definitely, to me, rivals kind of 97, which was probably the best vintage that I had in my career. And the one earlier than that was 1985, but that was literally my second year at the winery. But those 3 years were pretty spectacular in terms of what, the wines we made. Interesting thing about 97 is it was statewide. So, Napa, Central Coast, everywhere had just an awesome vintage. It was kind of that, Steve Peck sometimes talks about the Goldilocks vintage, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And that's kind of what 97 was. But 2019 in particular in the Central Coast was kind of that Goldilocks vintage. It was, below average crop size. The cluster architecture of the reds were a little bit open. And so if you think of light is important for color development, it allowed light to penetrate in, all these different red varietals to sort of optimally develop color. And color in a lot of ways does sort of help with flavors and softness in red wines. And so 2019, like, it was off the charts relative to the last, 15, 18 years of wines that we have produced in Paso. And yeah, we kind of saw some initial drain downs on the reds and stuff. And we're like, wow, that block never does that, And so it just kind of continued throughout the season to where, towards the end of the year, I'm like, this is, 97 was a great year, but 2021 is definitely a rival for that. So certainly I think, some of the wines are, some of the finest that we have made in Paso to date, for sure. So Brendan is right in that. And I've been fortunate to have a few of those, but I had to wait a long time since 97 for that to happen. So,
and then 22 years, no big deal.
Yeah.
Wait.
And the Hilltop again is really kind of our tête de cuvée for Paso Cab. We have signature and everything, but Hilltop really has really encompasses all of the best of Paso. And we source it from 3 different vineyards, our Shotwell vineyard in the cool climate, the El Pomar district climate of Paso, which it gets to be about 50% of the fruit source for that. And it really brings kind of that blackberry fruit as well as a little bit of the savory spice. So if you think of espresso or coffee, it kind of brings that in. The other vineyard is our Beck vineyard, which is a little bit to the southeast of Shotwell, but at 1,700 feet of elevation. And we tend to get this really beautiful, bright cherry fruit character, and the tannins are super fruity and super bright as well, kind of echoing those same characters. And then the final portion comes from the Jean vineyard again, where we have mostly Rhones, but about a third of the vineyard we planted a Cabernet. And out there, we get really ample winter rainfall every year where we can literally dry farm out that way. And we tend to get this really pure creme de cassis kind of liqueur sort of fruit character and this real structural tannin out there. And so those 3, wines together, or those 3 vineyards together, really create this very complex wine. There's a lot going on aromatically here with that. In 19, we really didn't need blenders. This is 99% Cabernet. There's just a little bit of Petit Verdot and a little bit of Malbec in there. And it's probably, in that case, it's just through wine movements they were put in, not put in intentionally at the end in any sort of blending format. But it was just because the cab in 19, the strength of cab was just incredible. So it's, got great, super dark color. Color by itself doesn't mean a lot. I don't think, if it's not naturally occurring, I guess, in the grapes. But what the color and the molecule responsible for it is also has a really sweet texture and taste. So it really helps the wine in the softness aspect of it, and which is really what we try to achieve with Hilltop. So, there's kind of some of that blackberry fruit. There's definitely this coffee and graphite character. Some of that black currant. There's some brown spices, and then I'll taste it in a second. But it's a really full palate. And yet it's soft with all of those fruit characters and stuff in there. And curious to see what your impression of this wine's still a little bit young, I would say. You know, it probably needs another couple of years, like our cuvées when we release them, where they've had a chance to really develop. But I do think it shows some great promise.
So I wrote youthful first thing. So it is definitely I got some blackberry cassis. I wrote oak forest. I didn't know how to describe it fully, but it's not, it just has sort of and maybe the youthfulness, but a really fresh, like woodsy sort of smell. I got definitely a little bit of baking spice, Mexican hot chocolate. So, you know, the hot, where you have the little sort of chipotle peppers. So had a little like spice to it with those. It wasn't just a chocolate or cocoa. It had, you know, a little spice to it. So that's definitely roasted coffee for the aromas as well. It's kind of where I was going. I should start going first, so then we can see if you're copying me versus me copying you.
Yeah, we'll do that next on the next one. Definitely.
So if this one is 99% Cabernet, like you mentioned, what is typically Hilltop? Are we looking at 90% Cabernet or 94% Cabernet?
No, we were having that conversation earlier today with, was talking to Jerry, and I would say we're in the 85 to 90% is probably more typical for Hilltop. But in 2019, with the strength of the cab, it made sense that wine was really complete with that. We really didn't need a lot, from a blender standpoint. So we had the size, the structure, and also the softness. So sometimes the wine just makes itself, and 19 was definitely one of those years. So.
And it's in California, just fun wine fact. In California, it is a wine must be 75% a single varietal to label it. So for instance, it has to be at least 75% Cabernet Sauvignon to label it Cabernet Sauvignon. And then it can have some other blenders in there. Like Jeff mentioned, we'll do it for color or structure, things like that. So.
That's right.
So pairing, I think.
I'll let you go first on this one then. How's that?
I did super simple pairing. Getting back to living here in the Central Coast, tri-tip is, this really reflects 3 vineyards that we have in Paso. So the sense of place that we have spanning our 3 vineyards here. So like Jeff mentioned, or you mentioned, Jeff, we have the furthest west vineyard in Paso Robles. Then our Beck vineyard is our furthest sort of like southeast vineyard that we have, and then that Creston Shotwell vineyard is right in the middle. So it really spans like a large variety of Paso Robles. And I think if we're talking about sense of place, like you have to sort of pair it with tri-tip, which is just so wildly popular here in the Central Coast. So that's what I would choose.
Yeah, and I'm not really much different from you. I just have a different cut of red meat and same sort of thing. Just, I don't think it has to be super complicated. I just had like a bone-in ribeye with, heavily salted and peppered with some, I've been kind of enjoying Beaumont seasoning for some of the red meats these days. And, just so it's pretty covered, and then just on the grill, and then, have some herb butter at the end when you pull it off the grill and you let it rest. Just put a little bit of that on the ribeye and let it sort of melt down and in, and then like some roasted parsnips or carrots with that, and you've got a great meal. So
perfect. So while we move on to our next wine, which will be our 2019 J. Lohr Home Ranch Petit Verdot, which I don't know if I can say it's my favorite of the lineup. Last night, that's how I was feeling. I think this wine is incredible. I'm just gonna ruin it. It's super like lush. But we did get a question, Jeff, on if the 2019 whites were of the same vintage quality. You know, would you call that sort of a vintage, you know, a really stellar vintage for the white wines, or did a lot of that have to do with sort of the color and what makes up more of a red wine?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, you know, on the white side of things, they tend to be the cooler vintages. So if you think about, well, I think about over the last, you know, I may say 22 years, when I was director of winemaking, I would say, you know, the years like 98, which was really cold and quite wet, 2010 and 11, which were pretty cool, were really nice vintages in the Arroyo Seco. And kind of in recent years, I mean, this year is sort of tracking in terms of degree days and temperature and everything with those cooler vintages of 10 and 11 in the Arroyo Seco. So yeah, I guess, you know, vintage of the career and decade tends to be heavily weighted towards the red wine side of things, I would say. And the whites are more, I'd say, the cooler years where there's a little bit, you know, more acid, maybe a little bit more ageability for those wines in those years. Even though the climates themselves where we are, the climate in the Arroyo Seco is cool, it's like even the cooler vintages in those particular years. So you tend to also be a little less, maybe a little less ripe, a little lower alcohol, a little higher acidity in those vintages. So
I'm cheating already and taking sips of the Petit Verdot, and it is just.
You have to pace yourself here because our teeth are going to be purple by the end of this segment for sure.
That's fine. My teeth can be purple. I'll brush them later. It's the sacrifices that we have to make, Jeff.
Yep.
All right. Tell me a little bit about the Petit Verdot and why do I love it so much?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like there, you know, we have obviously at the wine centers, we've introduced some new wines the last few years. I think part of it is for us and, you know, for our guests and everything is just to be able to talk a little bit about our Bordeaux varietal program. And so we felt it was important to, you know, to make some of these varieties as single varietals to help kind of educate what they bring to the table. So with the 2019, this is our third vintage making Petit Verdot. And it grows really well right around the wine center in the Estrella district. So a slightly warmer area there. A lot of it just is the attention to detail from the farming team and John Perini and his team there on the home ranch. But it's Petit Verdot likes to, you know, throw a lot of clusters, and we have to manage that very heavily from the vineyard side of things. So a lot of times it'll have 3 or 4 clusters per shoot. We need to make sure there's no more than 2. We need to make sure that the fruit is spread out. So there's a lot of handwork that goes on with Petit Verdot. It is one of the most tannic varietals that we grow in the Bordeaux portfolio. And so the challenge from a winemaking standpoint is really managing that. And what we, you know, Brendan and Steve, really what we're trying to do is get all the color out and get very little of the tannin. So we tend to have very short, not super extractive fermentations for Petit Verdot, so that we do get that softness, we get the beautiful color and the aromatics and all that sort of thing. So this is typically like a 3-day ferment for this wine. So we're pressing when the wine's probably only half of the sugar has been consumed by the yeast, but it turns out like this. It's got this, it's got the great color, and surprisingly, it's a really, well, I tell you what, I'm going to let you describe this wine so I don't do it before you do this time. So what can you say about that?
Well, so so this is our third vintage of single varietal Petit Verdot that we've done here at J. Lohr, and have all the vintages been from home ranch? I believe the answer is yes.
They have, yeah, they've all been home ranch. We've been growing Petit Verdot since I think 1996 was the first year that we actually budded over a vineyard to Petit Verdot, but we've been growing it literally for 20 plus years now.
Okay, so I wrote, or this definitely has some like cedar for me, some cherry, a little bit of like anise or black licorice, some nice baking spices, and I just think that the tannins are powerful, but they're still soft and enjoyable. Yeah, I think this is just a beautiful wine. The color on it is, I mean, I think it is like incredible. I had my hair dyed this color at one point in my life. And it makes me want to go back. I won't, but I just think that this color can't be replicated by a box dye. It's just so wonderful and vibrant. And I just, yeah, it's sort of nature, like very beautiful.
Yeah, no, I'm all that's, and I had probably added a little, like some hazelnut too in there, and maybe a little, I remember if you said dark chocolate, but I definitely had that as one of the descriptors for that wine as well. But yeah, just really, it's really mouth-filling, but it's really soft for a wine of that size, and yeah, to do Petit Verdot that way is a big, credit, and, tip of the hat to Brendan and Steve for just really making this big, substantial wine that's really soft. So love it. It's a great wine, and it has been one of the favorites in the wine centers of these single varietal Bordeaux varieties. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I believe John, I see you on there, and John comes from the East Coast, but I believe the Petit Verdot is one of the reasons why he joined. You can correct me if I'm wrong, John, in the chat. But he really enjoys a single varietal. So I chose, this is another one I made sure to have a vegetarian recipe for, and I did a mushroom carbonara, which it's one of the best things I've ever made, and it was so simple. So it was just some garlic, onion, mushrooms cooked for about 20 minutes, and I did fresh. I did not make the pasta, but I purchased it, so I've done fresh pasta with it, and then the egg yolks and the Parmesan cheese, and it was no bacon fat or pork fat required. If you wanted to not make it vegetarian, that's a great option. But I can tell you, as someone who does enjoy a lot of red meat and a classic carbonara, this mushroom carbonara will not disappoint as a vegetarian recipe. It was really great. I just thought the mushrooms paired really nicely with the Petit Verdot. So that would be my pairing choice.
I can't top that. So we'll on,
Okay. Ooh, I won that round.
Yeah. That's awesome, Kasey. Yeah.
All right, so next we are moving on to our 2017 Cuveé PAU. So this is, even though it's, a couple of vintages behind what we're currently releasing, that is very typical for our Cuveé series of wines. They tend to sit in the bottle a little bit longer before we release them. So this is a brand new release, or we could even call it a pre-release for Wine Club, because it's not anywhere else except for going to be in your guys' shipments. And so the PAU is one of the 3 Cuveé wines that we do, and this one is based in Cabernet Sauvignon. So.
Yeah, and Kasey, I really love the cuvées, because I think part of it, that extra time in bottle, by the time we release it, the wine is really together, 100%. It's had a fair amount of time to just sort of sit and marry, and so from the standpoint of the aromatics and everything, it's just really forward. It's really complex, and all the good stuff you really want to see in a red wine. And from the standpoint of the cuvee, is that the goal was to try to to mimic some of those appellations within Bordeaux, and in this case from Pauillac. So we're definitely looking at being a Cabernet Sauvignon based blend. And again, from vintage to vintage, depending upon what Mother Nature delivers in terms of weather, which has a huge impact on the flavors and aromas and so on from the different Bordeaux varietals, which in and of themselves ripen at different times throughout the growing season, really plays into that whole blending and élevage aspect of winemaking. And in 2017, this fruit was kind of sourced from a cooler area in the Willow Creek district of Paso, so really close to the Templeton Gap. Cool climate, and we like that in the cabs that we do use for the PAU, because we really want it to be slightly more of an older world style in terms of the aromatics and the flavors, and so in 2017, which was in and of itself, it was a really nice vintage until 2019 came along. So that meant that this is not a varietal Cabernet in that particular year. It's 67% Cabernet Sauvignon. And to kind of help fill that wine out and really kind of add to that varietal freshness, it has a big chunk of Cab Franc in there, about 27%. And then just a touch of Merlot, and then just a little, like a percent of Petit Verdot, to really kind of complete that wine, that Petit Verdot, to give it a little more, give it some structure and some age worthiness, because we're really making these wines to be 10 to 20 year wines, and have that optimum window be kind of where we are now for the next 6-7 years, where the wine's going to be drinking really, really nice. And I think that's what I'm seeing here today with this wine. So it gets very traditional Bordelais sort of treatment as far as its aging. It's 18 months and a high percentage of French oak, new, about 60 or 2/3 of the barrels are new barrels. And then again, we're using more water bent, so it's a little bit less in terms of the oak impact aromatically and on the palate. And for me, again, it's just like this really forward and super attractive. It's like a concentrated blueberry and black currants and chocolate and cedar, and just lots of really, really pretty aromatics. And then the palate is really, again, full, soft, but it's a different kind of palate feel than some of the other ones you've had today. I kind of call it in a very hard to describe way, but just elegant. It has this really nice, very finesseful sort of finish and mouthfeel to the PAU, and should age really beautifully for the next 10 years or so. So how about you? What's your, I don't know, in the Cuveé lineup, where does Cuveé PAU stand for you, Kasey?
So Saint E, the Cuvée Saint E, which is our Cabernet Franc based one, used to be like my favorite prior even to working here at J. Lohr. That was, my favorite Cuvée. And then it was last year in 2020 in the fall that the 16 PAU completely changed it for me. And that was the one that I just started immediately gravitating towards. I definitely get, like you were saying, a little bit, I pick up more of those savory notes in this, which is abnormal for me. I typically enjoy fruit forward wine. That is not that this doesn't have great fruit characteristics. I think it has like great cherry, but this one I really, picked up like cigar box and spice, some juniper into it, and baking spices. And I think that, pairing wise too, like it going forward, this is such a wonderful wine for the holidays, because those baking spice sort of really, any sort of like Thanksgiving or Christmas pot roast would go really nicely with this one. This one is, I have another pairing. This is not my pairing. This is our director of hospitality. Her husband is German, and their Christmas dish that they make is always a venison ragu with bread dumplings and cabbage. And when they tasted this wine, I had the chance to taste with her and her husband last night, and he said, "You got to get this for the holidays." Like immediately, this is the wine we're drinking around Christmas. So I think going forward for the holidays, that'd be really nice with this, and I'd love to drink it all year.
Yeah, that's a tough one to beat as well. But yeah, sometimes like you have people over, you don't want to be like a slave to what's, you're making or whatever. And there's a couple of dishes, and there's one it's like a Provençal stew or dough Provençal. And the really nice thing about it is basically you're done 2 hours before your guests arrive, and it's just sitting in the oven and making the house smell amazing, because there's all these great aromas and stuff for that. And I tend to use like lamb shoulder and pancetta for that, and just have these little cubes and brown them, and then you take them out of the pot. You have your carrots, celery, and onion, and garlic, saute briefly, and then of course you have to put in like a half a bottle of red wine. I don't know if I would necessarily do the PAU for that in the house that goes in there, but it certainly could be part of it. And then you have your little your herb bundle. So in this case, it would be rosemary, thyme, and parsley, and then some chopped Roma tomatoes. And then you'll put your meat back in and add some orange zest, and just make sure the meat's covered if you have to add a little water. But basically put the lid on it, stick it in the oven, and 2 hours later you have this, well, everybody's stomach is growling, that's there. But 2 hours later, you just heat up some ribbon pasta and kind of put this over the top of it. And for me, I just like that kind of the time cooking with all of those great ingredients to create this really aromatic, complex dish that really is a very nice complement to something that has the finesse and prettiness of the PAU. So that would be my, not super complicated, but time-wise, it's a long time, but the actual dish itself is not that complicated.
And I just have to mention another favorite thing for me with all of our Cuvée wines and our Vineyard Select Society, which is our 8-bottle shipment, is we always include, we do 3 shipments a year, so always one of the cuvées is in your shipment, but also as Jeff mentioned, the ageability of these. So we always include the current release cuvee. So for this fall shipment, it's going to be this 2017. And we include a cellared one or a library feature, which will be the 2014. And I think that's great because, again, if you're anything like Jeff or myself, we are for instant gratification and we do not age our wines because we drink them right away. So this is the cheater way to age your wines, is have us age them for you.
It's a very effective strategy for sure. You know,
Yeah.
that's the only way that happens in my house, is if someone gives me something that's older. So
Exactly, me too. And then yes, we will be sending out not all of the recipes. I'm sorry, I do not have the venison and ragu recipe, but a lot of the recipes Jeff and I have, we'll be sending those out because we have your emails from registration and in your wine club membership. And as we're drinking cabs, we also recently just created a new recipe book, many of our winemaking team and from chefs around the country. So it's a celebration of Cab 10 recipes. And we'll have Josh, who is our behind the scenes man, put that in the chat. So you guys can have that recipe book as well, because it has, you know, the Hilltop Cab and our Shotwell Cab and some other things. So that's that recipe book will hold you over until we get you this one from the recipes we're talking about today. So as we move on to the Malbec, I actually wrote all of my notes on a piece of paper, so I want to get them because I want to make sure now that this has been open a day, I want to see if I taste anything a little different as it's gotten some air. So Jeff, you want to give us a little information about our 2019 J. Lohr Shotwell Vineyard Malbec?
Yep. Absolutely, and go grab your notes, Kasey. But yeah, so again, we've got these four awesome wines from the 2019 vintage. The Malbec is, again, another one of these Bordeaux varietals, and if you were to look at it in terms of how it works from a blending standpoint, it is one of a high color wine. So super dark, very much, if we were to say, be kind of more the blue fruit character, blueberries, oh gosh, some black currants and so on. But it's also very soft in terms of its tannin feel. So it's unlike Petit Verdot, which probably has a little bit less color but way more tannin. This varietal is just a softer variety, great for blending. And the first year that we made our Wine Center Malbec was actually, we called it El Pomar Ranches. And the reason being is so there's the Shotwell Vineyard, and then there's Neil Springs Road, and then there's our Creston, we call it our Creston Vineyard, literally right across the street, and we have Malbec in both. And in 2017, the Malbec came from both of those ranches, but the Malbec that has really ascended in terms of the overall quality of the fruit coming from the vineyard is from the Shotwell Vineyard, which is on the south side of Neil Springs Road. And it's kind of a northeast facing, very, very steep vineyard that just produces in that cool climate this, wow wine. It's like super fruity, dark, and really plump plus mouthfeel. It's just this, incredible wine. And we're happy to be able to share it in the wine centers because it is such a neat wine. And again, you add on to it the 2019 vintage, and you've got a double wow wine, I guess, in the case of the Malbec in 2019. And for Malbec, we definitely handle it a little bit more almost like Pinot Noir in terms of in the winery. So again, hand harvested, open top fermenters, and then doing punch downs as opposed to pump overs or more aggressive sort of extraction. It's definitely a more gentle type of extraction that we do with that. All of these DTC wines or the wine center wines too, we're trying to not have a huge oak impact on them. So it's usually in the 15 to 22% range. So we're really showcasing the varietal itself, which here was about 23% new French oak. And again, a little bit shorter aging time than like the Petit Verdot is 18 months, the Malbec is 16. So just a little slight tweak in terms of the oak residence time for Malbec. Again, just trying to showcase the fruit character of that wine. And I think in terms of what it shows in the glass is kind of that big plump wine that is fairly soft, although it's young. So it does definitely show a little bit of tannin right now, but it is fairly soft. And for me, aromatically, and I'll let Kasey follow on this one since she had to go get her notes. This has kind of that strawberry. To me, there's like a strawberry with almost like a balsamic vinegar mix with that. Some dried cherry, blueberry, almost like a molasses and milk chocolate, just like a really lots of things going on aromatically with this wine. And again, that big plump wine and texture.
I definitely got those like sort of, I wrote down like dark brown sugar. So definitely cranberry for me is maybe where I was going, because it has like, again, dark brown sugar. So I wouldn't think it has a nice sort of acidity, but that like, I don't know, the sort of acidicness of cranberry kind of came through for me. I got some smokiness from it. It was, again, I feel like I'm saying this with all of them, but it's true, just dense and soft. I opened this wine on Monday night. So I barely drank any, but I corked it tightly and then I put it in my fridge. And it is still, typically if I open a bottle of wine tonight, it would be tomorrow that I would drink it by, but this one is, still tasting really beautiful now 2 days later. So definitely that tannin structure is very nice. So, and I mentioned this earlier, I'll go with my food pairing before Jeff. Originally, my food pairing, I thought lamb kebabs would go well, but as we were preparing for this live, I showed Jeff I was very hungry purchasing in Costco. And so the cocoa sort of chocolate notes, milk chocolates would go really great with brownies. Yes, I got a giant box of brownies while I was there, but this to me would go very nicely with those cocoa sort of flavors. So
yeah,
that would be my recommendation.
Oh, I'm with you on the chocolate. Yeah. Or an Argentine skirt steak with chimichurri sauce, but that's for later anyway.
Well, I think it shows that this wine can just continue on through your whole, dinner and dessert, and it's the appetizer. You could do like a harder cheese with it, or you could just have a glass for the appetizer, have a glass for dinner, and finish it off for dessert as well. So. So we have 2 more wines. We're a little bit over an hour, but you won't want to miss these 2. So the next one that we're going to taste is our 2019 J. Lohr Home Ranch Cabernet Franc. This wine we typically make just, the first vintage was 17. I think we made 50 cases and then maybe 1875. So we made a little bit more this time. It's 100 cases only. And I'll just tease the next one that we're going to have, which is our 2019 J. Lohr Buena Vista Saint Macaire. So that is its own varietal. So it's kind of fun. So I'll tease the Saint Macaire, but we'll start with our Cabernet Franc.
Yeah, Cab Franc, I mean, I've extolled the virtues of this variety, you know. I think part of it is just the surprise that it's been for me from a winemaking standpoint. When I took over the winemaking reins at the end of '95, Jerry had planted some Cabernet Franc, you know, in '91 in Paso, and kind of coming in and looking at it, it typically made sort of a light red wine. And so, you know, and I was kind of thinking about the wines in Europe that are produced from Cab Franc, and I would say the wines in the Loire Valley tend to be a little bit lighter. And so I was thinking, well, maybe that's from this area of California, maybe that's really what it is going to produce. But once we really started focusing on it and working with the varietal, we turned it into really what it is in its home in the Bordeaux appellation. It is surprisingly really drought tolerant. It's probably one of the most drought tolerant Bordeaux varieties out there. Again, you know, thanks to Johnny Perini and our team, it is a variety that tends to produce a lot of fruit. So you really have to manage heavily the crop load, the sun exposure, and all that sort of thing, trying to keep the clusters protected, and you know, have a space between the spur, hand space between the spurs, and no more than 2 clusters per shoot, etc. So it's a really labor intensive variety, but it has been such a pleasant surprise. I think that's why I'm so fond of it in my winemaking career, because it really, I think, represents what this variety, it still has all that varietal freshness aromatically. So if you think of espresso and, you know, raspberry and some really, you know, fresh coffee, berry compote, all that sort of lovely fruit character that Cabernet Franc can be. And then it has this really soft and sort of mid-palate weight mouthfeel. To me, that's just so attractive. I love it as a blender, and you know, we've kind of hidden it there largely as a blender, except for the Saint-Y, where it has kind of a lead varietal role. And so it's kind of fun to show it at its 100% Cab Franc self and what it can really be and do. It's a really, you know, really great variety to work with, and really a surprise. So I don't know, it sounds like that was something that intrigued you about Saint-Y in the past, Kasey. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on Cab Franc as a variety in that Bordeaux lineup, but
you know, it's I like a high maintenance thing, so I like that it's a little high maintenance. I think I think that like it has, you know, it's sort of high maintenance and rare. So I think that was sort of an attraction to me for it. Just because not a lot of people with the Saint-Y were doing Cab Franc, you know. J. Lohr has been doing the Saint-Y for 20 years, perhaps, or obviously we've only had the 16 vintage, but we've so I liked that it was sort of rare. It's now popping up a little bit more here in Paso Robles as a single varietal. But I like also Cab Franc. To me, I've always sort of viewed it as a little bit more masculine, a little bit like rugged. I chop wood for a living type wine. So it has like those softness with the cocoa but like sort of sweet tobacco. I got some hazelnut from this one. Also a little black tea aromatics, which I found really interesting. And then root beer. is another tasting note that I wrote, which then took me into a pairing option, which you can make root beer ribs. So that's how I got that pairing, because I sort of felt I was getting a little bit of root beer aromatics in it. So
no, that sounds like a great great pairing. And again, for me, I like the more sort of the slower cooked stuff together. So or in this case, again, just like a nice rack of lamb with like mustard herb crust and some, yellow or Yukon potatoes and some onions and rosemary kind of together. Again, just kind of paying, homage to this wine in that pairing. So, but I'm with you. I think all of those descriptors you had were sort of spot on. So, and what I love about Cab Franc.
So the last wine we have is our 2019 Buena Vista Road Saint Meier. So this wine is a limited production wine. It is what is considered the lost Bordeaux, the lost LOST, not last, but lost Bordeaux varietal. Jeff will give the technical explanation. So this wine is not a part of any shipment this time, but it is available to add on, or if you're a Vineyard Select Society member, you could customize with it as well. But it's just, again, the Lost Bordeaux varietal. So it's just very unique and interesting. And Jeff, can you tell us a little bit more about it and why we have it here at J. Lohr?
Yeah, what's interesting is I was doing during COVID, we were doing presentations to our teams and internally, and Saint Meier is one of the 8 Bordeaux varietals. The few that people don't really think about is Carmenere, Gros Verdot, and Saint Meier being those other 3 that don't necessarily come to mind when you're thinking about the Bordeaux varieties. We work with a consulting group for phenolics or structure of wines, which kind of keeps us on our toes as far as trying to understand kind of wine chemistry and things happening with that. And they kind of turned us on to this obscure varietal where there's literally, from the source in Bordeaux, there's less than 1 hectare of this variety left in Bordeaux. So I don't know what that says about the variety in Bordeaux, but in California, back even in the 1960s, it appeared on the California Grape Acreage Report, and there were a few hundred acres of Saint Meier around the state into like the late 60s and early 70s, and then it disappeared as a varietal in the Grape Acreage Report for California. But it has sort of seen a renewed interest, and for us in particular down in Paso, in the climate in the Estrella district, so again around the home ranch, around the wine center there, the variety seems to do really well. And it's like this, when you go out and see its growing habits and everything, it's kind of like the untamable child, so to speak. It has sort of a wild shoot growth. The clusters are big, the berries are big. And again, it's one that you really have to, from a management standpoint in the vineyards, really have to pay attention to, because it will definitely overcrop. But as I said, like with Malbec, where it's this really dark colored varietal with very low level of tannins, this is even kind of it produces a darker wine and even less tannin in its typical profile. but it has some really unusual aromatic characters to this wine. And for me, I kind of think of like plums thrown, like very ripe plums cut, thrown on the barbecue and grilled, smoked meat, a little bit of like, if you open up a fresh blueberry or blackberry jam and smell that the fruit character, there's some greenness to it, and there's also some fruit character to it. And I really get all of those things kind of put together with the Saint Macaire. Really exotic, but it's super plump and rich, but it's really, really soft. So this wine is just a great blender because of those characters. It can add concentration and soften down a wine that's tannic. So again, you know, the importance of like having these wines available at the winery, at the wine center, hopefully will help kind of educate us in our Bordeaux, our Cabernet winemaking program, our Merlot winemaking program, and what these different varieties contribute to the winemaking process. And when it comes to blending day, how we can use them like an artist palette of colors, essentially, to kind of put things together in a way that's really pleasing to the on aroma side and on the mouthfeel side. And Saint Macaire is just one of those unique finds that we made, and you know, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, and we're happy to share it, even though we haven't shared it a lot so far.
Yeah, I think the first year we made less than a barrel, which is 25 cases. So I think we made in that 2017 was our first vintage, and I think there was 18 odd cases, or so we made a little bit more for 2019 because some of our new plantings came online, so we had more fruit. And I completely agree with all of your descriptors, and I love them. The one I wrote that was sort of similar is I got sort of like a smoked cocktail, you know, when someone makes us a fancy bar now is making a smoked like old fashioned, and they sort of light a piece of wood and put the glass over and then pull it up, and then you get sort of that smoke. That's exactly what, because the smoke is, it's just nice and balanced, but it's definitely there, and I really enjoy that about this wine. So Jeff, I have an unrelated question, but somebody told me this, and now I want to potentially debunk a wine myth that is there a difference? Can you smell a difference in the aromatics of a wine if you are swirling your glass counterclockwise versus clockwise? Or is that a complete wine myth?
It's on which side of the equator you're on, you know, which way you swirl it. No. No, I don't think so. Because a lot of times when we're doing our vintage tastings and whatnot, we've got all this data. I have my pencil in my right hand, so I'm swirling with my left, so I'm going the opposite way, and I don't notice a difference. How's that? So yeah. And interesting, like for this wine, there's you know, as far as like a food pairing, at Halloween every year we make this. It's called Hollywood chili, and it was from this restaurant down in Hollywood called Chasen's, I think it was called. So it was like all the Hollywood celebrities back in the 50s and stuff would hang out there after their work day, and you know, sucking back martinis and whatever. But this chili was really famous, but it has a couple of spices in it, which is adobo sauce that, you know, so roasted, which to me is like, that is in this wine. You know, there's some of that smokiness, and I think it would be a really fun pairing, just like a simple, you know, kind of an exotic chili, even though it's old school. This recipe is like 60, 70 years old. And I can envision this being like perfect with that. So
I wrote sort of like a Cajun spice smoked chicken. So again, playing on some of those spices and the smokiness. But I really want to try this Hollywood chili now. So, all right. Well, that takes us to our last wine. Jeff, do you have any closing thoughts on sort of the 2019 vintage or some of the wines?
Yeah, no, I think it's super exciting to see these wines now just kind of making it out to be able to share with everyone. I'll be interested as these wines have another couple years in bottle. I think they're really going to be spectacular because they've got all of the makeup of some wines that should be really age worthy, but also incredibly aromatic and balanced, and to sort of showcase a vintage of a career in the case of Brennan, or one of the top three for myself. So super excited about that. And then Kasey, as you know, this will be my last one of these that I'll be doing with you, unfortunately. So I very much enjoyed it. Anyway,
well, I've enjoyed it too. I did miss a question. I believe the answer is no to this, but you might surprise me. Are we using any Carmenere in any of our wines, or?
We don't grow Carmenere, so
Okay.
that's and grow Verdot. So those are the two we do not have.
I don't know. I'm trying to think if I even know someone in Paso Robles who has it grown, but I don't think I do, John. But yes, Jeff, it's been a pleasure. And also, I'd love to congratulate you on being UC Davis's Alumnus of the Year, which is very exciting. So good job to you. And I really enjoy tasting with you. And if anybody has any questions about your shipment, please feel free to give us a call or email me at wineclubs@jlohr.com. And we're always happy to help. For those shipping, our fall wine club shipments will be shipping out on the 18th of October with so many of these wines that we tasted here tonight. And then the last thing I would just love to mention is on October 6th, we will be hosting a live event with Cynthia Lohr, and we'll be focusing on our Carol's Cabernet and our partnership with the National Breast Cancer Foundation. And so for those of you who don't know, for every bottle of Carol's Cabernet sold, we donate to that organization. And so if you're interested, on October 6th, we would love to have you guys join and just hear some great stories and our partnership with them. So it's been a pleasure. Cheers again, Jeff, to you for the UC Davis Alumnus of the Year. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. We really enjoyed this time with you.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and cheers.
Cheers.